Well, good Monday evening, everybody. Taylor Plott here, and we do have now Tropical Storm Rafael that has formed out in the Caribbean. So let's get right to it. We currently have a 90 or 95. We have a 45 mile per hour tropical storm that is now out there in the Caribbean right now. Tropical Storm Rafael. And this will continue to move off to the northwest over the next several days, and we'll be getting into the Gulf of Mexico, where, yes, there could be a chance that this does make landfall across parts of the Gulf Coast states. We'll take a look at the model guidance here shortly. But right now, here's Tropical Storm Rafael. Again, it is a 45 mile per hour tropical storm. The pressure is at 997 millibars, and it's moving to the north at 9 miles per hour. We do have believe it's a hurricane warning now for Jamaica. Let me quickly look over here on one of the other. A tropical storm warning. Tropical storm warning for Jamaica. But there is a hurricane watch that's in effect for that western Cuba area, where currently the National Hurricane Center has this as a 100 mile per hour Category 2 hurricane making landfall across western Cuba as you get into the day on Wednesday. And then it will eventually emerge across the southern Gulf of Mexico, where it should maintain hurricane strength. And Category 1 is currently forecasted as it moves to the northeast of Cuba. And then once it's to the west of Key West, still a Category 1. And then still a Category 1 once it gets into the central Gulf of Mexico. But then once it gets closer here to South Louisiana, it does become a tropical storm. So one of the things that we'll be watching for is drier air and shear. That should be impacting the system once it gets into the central Gulf of Mexico. And on top of that, the water temperatures are a lot cooler now that we're in the beginning of November. So we're not dealing with water temperatures in the Gulf that are around 90 degrees. So we're not dealing with that much fuel to work with. Temperatures are going to be in the upper 70s for the most part once you get into the central Gulf of Mexico. So it's kind of on the marginal side when it comes to dealing with tropical storms and maintaining their strength. But with the shear and drier air to work with, that's going to continue to make it weaken across parts of the Gulf of Mexico. Let's go ahead and take a look at some model guidance here. This is the GFS model. We're going to start this on late Tuesday. So once we get into the day on Wednesday, that's again where we're starting to see that landfall across western Cuba, most likely as a Category 2 hurricane. Then that moves across Cuba and emerges across the Gulf of Mexico, 987 millibars to the west of Key West. That should be that Category 1 hurricane. That's kind of where that pressure would be, right around that kind of Category 1 strength. And we'll continue to move to the northwest and will gradually weaken. There's probably a brief period, probably in this area here, right where it goes to the west of Key West. There's probably that brief period. See that pressure drop went from 987 down to 985. There's probably that brief period there off the southwestern coast of Florida where this could re-intensify just a little bit, so it could flirt around with getting back to around Category 2 strength. But I really wouldn't be too concerned about what this intensity is, because watch what happens once it gets into the central Gulf of Mexico. You see how that red area, how it's over here, it's very close to that center of circulation. Then once it moves to the northeast, notice how that gets displaced to the west. That's that wind shear that it will start to interact with. So you're going to end up getting all these storms getting pushed away from the center of circulation, so that should cause it to weaken. And you see it quickly weakens, according to the GFS model, once you get into early Saturday morning. Could be getting close to that Louisiana coast here, as most likely a tropical depression, maybe a very weak tropical storm. That's 1,001 millibars right there off the GFS model. So that's most likely a tropical depression or weak tropical storm at the moment. You see currently the pressure's at 997, and it's got maximum sustained winds at 45 miles per hour. So you take that pressure into account now, and you take a look at that 1,001 millibars, you're probably looking at a 35 mile per hour tropical depression or 40 mile an hour tropical storm. So Very weak, so not a big wind threat. But what this could do is bring some pretty beneficial rainfall to the Gulf Coast. Let's take a look. Let me move things out here to the southeastern United States. Watch how you start getting a lot more of that rain that gets into parts of Mississippi and Alabama with that circulation, that impulse of moisture moving on in. That's going to be interacting with a frontal boundary. So that could set the stage for some pretty good beneficial rainfall for parts of the South where there is an ongoing drought. If you take a look at this is going to be the Weather Prediction Center rainfall outlook for Saturday. And then once you get into Monday morning, notice that there could be anywhere from 2 to possibly 2.5 inches that have fallen here from parts of Mississippi into parts of Alabama. A lot better rainfall across central Georgia. There's a little bit of a different setup going on there. I think there's a little bit of a wedge front interaction going on with the tropical moisture, so that could set the stage for some pretty beneficial rainfall across parts of the Peach State. But again, once you get into Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday, interacting here with some of that frontal boundary moving in could bring some beneficial rainfall to the south. But that's not the only solution. Let me show you the European solution. And the European solution is quite interesting. So it has a weaker system making a landfall across parts of Cuba. So this would not be what the National Hurricane Center is forecasting. This would be a minimal hurricane at the most moving into parts of Cuba. But watch what happens once it gets to the Gulf of Mexico. It moves to the west. So this is now Friday evening, a 997 millibar, most likely tropical storm north of the Yucatan Peninsula, and it continues to move to the west. And notice how it also has the area of storms displaced from the center. So that's more wind shear that it's working with, and it continues to weaken and then just kind of sits there across the southwestern coast of Florida, or of Texas. Once you get into late Sunday into early Monday, and then it just dissipates. It just completely dissipates to the southeastern coast of Florida. So that is a completely different solution, unlike what the GFS model has. So what about the tropical tracks? So this is the latest guidance off of, it does say 18L. This was initialized when it was still a tropical depression. But notice how there's really not a lot of forecast members that agree with the European model. The greatest consensus is that it continues to move northwest and then gets picked up by that front and then moves into the southern U.S. This one, there's a lot of consensus that's hitting it anywhere between Mobile and, I would say, the Destin, Fort Walton Beach area, Pensacola area here in the western Florida Panhandle. So that's really where a lot of that consensus is located. So I don't really buy that European model solution at the moment, but it's something to watch. I mean, that's two completely different scenarios that's being thrown out by the GFS and the European model. But if you look at the other models, the model suite, as we like to call it, again, you see here that the majority of these guys, it keeps it moving to the northwest, getting into the central Gulf of Mexico, and then either completely weakens and dissipates south of Louisiana or continues to track to the north and impact parts of the Alabama and Florida area. So again, this would be the best case scenario because you're not going to be looking at a significant landfall. You're going to be looking at a weak tropical storm or tropical depression, but what you're getting is very beneficial rainfall across these areas. So yes, there could be some flooding problems. I don't think it's going to be significant flooding problems if this happens, but you'll definitely be looking at some pretty beneficial rainfall across parts of the southern U.S. once you get into the weekend, at least according to the model guidance as it stands right now. So again, that's the latest on Tropical Storm Rafael. Will eventually become Hurricane Rafael later on this week and should be making landfall on the western coast of Cuba on Wednesday as a Category 2. That's according to the National Hurricane Center, and then eventually merge into the Gulf of Mexico as a hurricane, but then will be impacted by wind shear, some dry air, and some cooler ocean temperatures, and that should cause it to weaken significantly by the time it gets to any potential landfall once you get into Saturday and Sunday this weekend across parts of the southeast. That's your latest tropical update on Tropical Storm Rafael. We'll have another one tomorrow once we get more data, and we'll just continue to watch. We'll continue to watch this as it moves to the northwest and eventually getting to the Gulf of Mexico. Hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you guys later on.